Hello, and this time we're talking about squares and roots, but I specifically mean square roots. Of course, you can have cubes and cube roots, but we'll just talk about squares and square roots for today. So what is a square? Now, obviously, a square, I don't want to be pedantic, a square is a shape, yes, and squaring as a number thing is related to squares as a shape thing, but squaring in terms of numbers means timesing by itself. So 7 squared means 7 times 7. And that kind of makes sense from a square the shape point of view in terms of the area of this shape is its length, 7, times its width, 7, so its area is 7 squared, and that's the link. And certainly, I can see why it would be called squaring when it makes a square. And the same thing for cubing, not that we're talking about that today, but cubing is finding the volume of a cube. Above that, we don't have words for it, we just say the power of 4, the power of 5, the power of 10, because there's not a shape that sort of relates to what we're doing. So that's what squaring is. It is timesing a number by itself. It doesn't matter what that number is, so any number squared is that number times itself. Now you should know for working up to GCSE, but all the way down, from sort of upper primary onwards, you should know some of the square numbers. And what I would suggest is that you know the first 15. So 1 squared is 1, 1 times 1 is 1, 2 squared is 4, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9, 3 squared is 9. And so you should know these numbers. If you don't know them, you can work them out and write them down in a test, sort of, for a list. If you need to say, what square number does this? Well, write them out, and then you can remind yourself what they are. 5 5s 25, 6 6s are 36, 49, 64, almost missed one out then, 81, and 100. That gives you the first 10, and then 121 is 11 squared, 144 is 12 times 12, 169 is 13 squared, 196, and 225. And I really do recommend you memorize these because they're quite useful just to have in your head, just to sort of recognize, there's a square number in this. That means I can do something that I wouldn't be able to do if it wasn't a square number. Okay, so that also means if you're asked what is 8 squared, well, hopefully you'll know it's 64, and if you don't, you can work it out in your head or on a calculator. But also, if it asks you what the roots are, you can work backwards. So what is a root? It's just the opposite. It just says, and this is the symbol here, the square root of 81 is saying what number, when you times it by itself, gives 81. And of course the answer is 9. Now, that is the only answer in this case because this square root symbol is asking for the positive root. But there is another answer when I ask the question in a wordy way. What number times itself is 81? Well, minus 9 squared is also 81. So if you've written it out like this, x squared equals 81, what is x? There are two answers. X equals plus and minus 9. Just got to be careful with that. But this symbol itself just returns the positive one. So if they ask you what is root 81, there's only one answer to that. That's 9. But if they ask you in a different way, if you are square rooting, then you have to remember that square rooting does give two answers, but this symbol is only asking for the positive one. So, okay, that's great. So we can square a number by timesing it by itself, and we can say, okay, square root means what number times by itself equals this. But just before I move on, we can say actually that any number in this square root has to be positive if you want an answer out of it. If you do the square root of minus 4, it doesn't work because you can't get a minus number when you square it. If you think about it, how do I make minus 4? Well, you could do minus 2 times 2, but that's not squaring because it has to be times by itself. And so minus 2 would have to be times minus 2, and a minus minus would give a positive. And of course, 2 times 2 would also be positive because you haven't got a minus. You can't get a negative answer when you square something because if it had a minus to begin with, it will cancel out and become a positive. So the question of, what is the root of -4, that will be a maths error at the moment. In the future, we might define something by in the future, I mean in your future of learning, it's already happened, that mathematicians have defined this in a way to give an imaginary answer, but you don't need to worry about that until you get to A level. So what's the other thing you could be asked to do? Well, you could be asked to estimate things. So you might be asked to sort of work out a squared. So you might be asked to sort of say, okay, well, what's 7.5 squared? Well, that's actually not too bad. You can estimate it. It's in between 7 squared, which is 49, and 8 squared, which is 64. But you can actually work it out. If you don't have a calculator, you can still do it. You can do 7.5 times 7.5. Now, personally, I would do 75 times 75 if I was doing that and work it out, long multiplication. And remember to divide your answer by 100 at the end because I times by 10 and by 10. But you can also do that on a very basic calculator. Often, simple ones would just add, take, times, divide. You can just times it, 7.5 times 7.5, sorted. The harder one is can you estimate the square root? And there is a way of doing square roots with paper, and paper and pen. But if I ask for the square root of 70, without a calculator, that's really quite tricky to do. But I can estimate at least because I know that it's somewhere in between. If it was root 64, it would be 8, and root of 81 would be 9, and 70 is in the middle somewhere, so it's going to be 8 point something. So you might guess it's around 8.4, 8.5. I don't actually know, it might be 8.6. Okay, but at least you know that it's between two numbers because that is in between two squares. Of course, if you have your calculator, it's really straightforward because you've got a button. So here we've got the squared button. So we can say 7 squared equals, and I can do my 7.5 squared equals, and press SD, and there we go. And for the square root, I've also got that button here. It's just there, and you have to press. This time you have to press it first, and then you type in your number. So the square root of 70, and unhelpfully, it tells you that the square root of 70 is the square root of 70 because the calculator believes in giving you exact answers. So just press SD, and it'll tell you the decimal if that's what you want. So the final thing to show you is just to be careful of these negatives. I did say that you always get a positive answer when you square it. So let me show you. -3 squared is, I just said you always get a positive answer. So where's this -9 come from? Well, 9 makes sense. 3 squared is 9, but minus gives a minus. So am I wrong or is the calculator wrong? Well, neither. What's gone wrong is I've put the wrong question into the calculator. I've asked it to do 3 squared, and then it's taken that away from nothing. It said, what is -3 squared? Well, 3 squared is 9. What's -9? -9. The reason is because the calculator always does BIDMAS, and BIDMAS says to do powers first. So if you want to do a minus number squared on the calculator, you have to pop it in a bracket to say, no, square the whole thing, including the minus sign, and then it works. So just be careful with that. A square, the answer to a number squared is always positive, okay? And you can't do the square root of a negative number. I think that's all I have to say on this, but if I've missed anything, if you've got any questions, then you can put them in the comments below. But for now, cheerio.